Record in just a moment. Hello, my name is Victoria Bard, founder of Create Yes, Your Essential Self, encouraging everyone to embrace the experience of evolving. We are here in the EvolveUP room as part of UP Convergence, leading up to Peace Weekend. My guest right now is Connie and Andrew. They're going to be talking about the third great synthesis, the US of A and the evolution of consciousness, answering the call of the promise of a US of A to make it a reality. They will tell you a little bit more about that in just a moment, but Connie Baxter Marlowe and Andrew Cameron Bailey are authors, filmmakers, inventors, and inspiring public speakers and workshop leaders. Their work over the past 25 years has been to bring an understanding of the role Indigenous people and values have played in the evolution of consciousness for the realization of the human potential and for walking in balance on and with the earth. They are authors of the book, The Trust Frequency, 10 Assumptions for a New Paradigm, and The Mayflower Revelations, producers of the film In Search of the Future, What Do the Wise Ones Know?, Seeds of Freedom, A Vision for America, and the DVD series, The American Revolution, Voices of America. Connie and Andrew, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Virginia, Victoria, Queen Victoria.
Yeah.
We appreciate that lovely introduction. Yeah. And our film series is The American Evolution, not the American Revolution. It's about the evolutionary upward spiral that America is on. And we are here to share the third great synthesis with a look at the history of the United States and where that American dream came from, that dream, that true dream that is our birthright of liberty, justice, equality, and abundance for all. Because in a higher consciousness, there is abundance for all. And we would like to show how America came to this and how it's walking through these syntheses with the Native Americans. It's so important to bring the Native Americans to the table and what the role they have played in this process of the evolution of consciousness here in the Americas. So we'll go from there. Andrew's written a novel called The Mayflower Revelations,
which sets out actually to set the record straight, because I'd like to state right now that a lot of the information that people have about those early days in the founding of America are wrong, are incorrect. I read something just yesterday published in England about the 400th anniversary that is completely wrong and incorrect in this historic year, 400 years down the road. So I think it's important to set the record straight, because the record is actually a lot more positive than a lot of the misinformation we've been given. So that's just one thing. And the second one is, as you can probably tell from the way I speak, I'm not an American. And so I was listening to this phrase coming up over and over again, our country. And I said, well, it's not my country. And I don't have a country because the world is my country. I'm really a global citizen in my inner heart. So it just hit me suddenly, wait a minute, it is our country. Depends on what you mean by us, our. And I would like to rephrase that as the human species has a country. It's an experimental country called the United States of America. And if we approach it from that standpoint, an evolutionary upward movement step for humanity in this democratic experiment that is so challenged at this moment.
Exactly. That's the eagle's perspective. So it's not about our country. It's about the evolution of human consciousness and the role the Americas have to play, the land that is the Americas, that the Native Americans have been custodians of, that have brought to this process in the past, which nobody understands. This whole beautiful history of these syntheses between the European colonists who came for freedom of conscience, and came together with the Native Americans who lived according to that freedom of directly relating to our divinity, to Creator. So let's get started. We have a PowerPoint that we want to just walk you through this process, because ultimately it's going to take a transformation of consciousness to get to realizing that vision. We can't do it in the current paradigm of scarcity and fear and separation. So what we're going to do is show the steps that have led to this point and some clues on how a transformation of consciousness can occur through our contribution, which is a book we've written called The Trust Frequency, 10 Assumptions for a New Paradigm. So that's our contribution, is some assumptions on the nature of the universe that will allow us to walk in trust. In God we trust, which is the emblem of the United States of America. In God we trust. E pluribus unum, from the many one. So let's get started and walk through this process. And we will share screen and do this PowerPoint process. So let's see, here it is. And
Probably not that. That's this one's probably this one.
this, right? There we are.
There we are.
And now we have to make that full screen. And then we're going to go to slideshow.
Maybe you can slide the whole time up so it really does full screen. There
Yeah.
you go. And over that
Play
way a
from
little.
start.
Here we go.
And here we go. So here we are at the UP Convergence in the EvolveUP room. And we are bringing the third great synthesis. The
And
United
what on earth does that mean? We shall be discovering, but I would like to point out that today is Thursday, September 17th, as it says on your screen. So this is it's called Constitution Day, and our Caravan of Unity is currently in Philadelphia, where the American Constitution was ratified and signed. And showing up at that constitutional convention were
Native Americans. The Iroquois came to the Constitutional Convention and advised the drafters of the Constitution. So that's the second great synthesis.
Yeah, so we'll be getting there, but I know I'm
Yes.
jumping the gun.
Right,
But I just wanted
it's
to put,
important right
I
here,
wanted to
right
put
now.
this in the context of today, this moment, now.
Right.
It's a really important moment if we know what it is. Most people,
Constitution Day.
I'm certain that hardly any Americans even know that.
Right.
It's
In
amazing.
1787, on
Right.
September 17th, 1787, 233 years ago, the 34 men signed the Constitution of the United States.
Those men.
Those guys. Well, we can be thankful for those visionary guys who had a dream for all of us,
And were
that we could
advised
do this
by-
thing. And they were advised by the Native Americans, the
And they
chiefs of
forgot,
the
they left
Iroquois,
out one major thing
which is,
from the Iroquois Confederacy, their constitution.
and that is the power of the
power
women.
of the women.
Yeah.
Having left that out, here we are, 233 years down the road, and we missed a point a long time ago. Are
Right.
we ever going
Yeah.
to
Yes.
fix that little
Yes, yes,
glitch?
yes. The
Mm.
feminine, the women,
Yeah,
they recognize that power of the women who could appoint, well, who could take the chief out. If the chief were not operating according to his heart and according to the serving the people, they could take him
Right.
out.
the clan mothers.
The clan mothers. So, and they had lots of other powers and still do. And so interestingly enough, also the Mayflower Pilgrim women had a lot of power in Plymouth, which nobody realizes. So here we go. We will proceed to the third great synthesis. When we come together as equals, as family, and we each open our hearts and our minds to the other, the melding of our gifts will bring a new perspective that is invisible at this time. This new perspective will allow us to see the path to true unity, peace, and freedom. So that's been my understanding for decades.
When did you write that?
I wrote that in the 90s
Yeah,
and had it at the bottom of my emails forever.
right.
And it really said, when we come together with the Native Americans as equals, but I expanded it to all races, all people, because that's really what it's all about, is us all coming together, red, yellow, white, and black, in our hearts. So, and here is a Hopi prophecy.
When birds fall from the sky and the animals are dying, a new tribe of people shall come unto the earth from many colors, classes, and creeds, who by their actions and deeds shall make the earth green again. They will be known as the warriors of the rainbow.
So here we are, folks. We are warriors of the rainbow. It's up to us now to come together in this whole movement into our hearts, with the heart coherence pulses going around the world, with heart math, the new science showing the power of the heart that to transform all of reality, and the power of our consciousness. We'll get into that. So the promise of the US of A, the American dream, is our birthright: liberty, justice, equality, and abundance for all. So we each have to answer that call now. It's up to us, the us of A, the US of A. So let's go forward and bring to reality this promise. So we wanted to run over just the history that one might not be aware of. Do you want to run through that a bit, Andrew?
Why don't you start? I wouldn't mind
Okay.
saying something once we get to
Okay.
when the Pilgrims actually met the Native Americans.
Okay, well, in
Is that okay?
1606, the separatists, the Puritans wanted to purify the king of the Church of England in the 1500s, and started the Puritan movement. There were certain ones of them, the clergy and more, who once the Bible was translated into English and was sitting on the dining room tables of the people, it was mass produced in the late 1500s, and people could see what was intended from the divine through the Bible. And that was that we had the right to operate according to our conscience and a direct connection. So they said the church, we can't purify the church, we have to separate from it. It was an act of treason, and they had to leave England.
Why was
They
it
were
an act
arrested
of treason?
because the King of England was the head of the church, and it was a mandate: you must attend the Church of England. So this is very key step for humanity that these peoples took, moms, dads, and kids. They defied their king and committed treason, went to jail briefly. They sold all their stuff, and they had to go to Holland, where it was freedom of religion. Well, this gave them an opportunity to construct their own religion based on what they felt was mandated in the Bible by the divine.
Or a true interpretation of the Bible, because now they could study it in English. Previously it was in Latin.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So they were in Leiden, Holland, and they were lecturers at the university there. They were also forced to be tradesmen. They could, because of the guild system in Holland, they couldn't be anything but tradesmen. And they, after several years, 12 years in Holland, they felt that it was time to move on, because there was a treaty with Spain that was going to be up, and they didn't know if Catholicism was going to be reestablished in Holland. Holland was going to lose their freedom of religion, and their children were starting to become Dutch. And they were like, hey, wait a minute, we're English, so let's get going. And they looked at lots of different places to go and decided upon the Americas. And they headed out for America. And upon their arrival, after how many weeks? 6 weeks?
66 days.
66 days at sea. in a small boat. It's a whole story,
Pretty beaten up.
but it's an amazing story.
It's
The
dramatic as hell.
Mayflower, some divine happenings happened that got them where they landed, and they landed on they came just outside of Cape Cod, and there was no way for them to get down to Virginia where they had a patent. So they were out of the jurisdiction of their patent, which they were given
From the King of England.
from the
yeah.
King of England. They finally got from the King of England.
Right.
So it's not known if they were blown off course or if they intentionally went off course, because Virginia already had a church and had a whole thing going on.
Church of England was
Church.
established there, and it would have been challenging for them to
Yeah.
stick to their principles.
So
right.
we don't know, but what they landed, they came in 1620, and they wrote what's known as the Mayflower Compact. We're going to get a little more, we're kind of running through this.
Sort of an overview. at this
Overview.
point, right?
And in 1621, we'll just keep going. In 1621, they, so they arrived in 1620.
Which, please note, is exactly 400 years from 2020. November 9th, 1620, they first sighted land, and that land happened to be Cape Cod, present-day Massachusetts.
Yes, and it wasn't until the spring of the next year that they met with their first Native American, Massasoit, and they created a treaty. So let's go on.
And this is where I'd like to jump in and say one quick thing. It was said again in writing from England as they celebrate the 400th anniversary, Plymouth, England, that the Native Americans fed them and housed them through the first winter, which is not true in any sense, because they didn't meet any Native Americans until 1621 in the spring, once the first winter was over, and during which winter, half of their number died of an illness called the general sickness, right?
Right.
We think it might have been scurvy. We don't really know. But point being, there's so much misinformation.
Yeah,
There's the
good
first
heavens.
piece of misinformation, that the Native Americans actually welcomed them and took care of them. That is not in the least true. And there's a lot more detail there I won't go into now.
And they ended up actually feeding the Native Americans.
I know that. I wasn't
So,
going to go there.
Anyway,
Yeah.
let's go on, because
the Mayflower actually had plenty of food, and half their people died, and they were all sick. So the food lasts a lot longer under those conditions.
Yeah, so here we go. What we want to do is
Go to the next page.
go to the next page, but it's not
Not
going.
working from there.
Hmm.
Oh,
So what's going on?
this is exciting.
This is exciting. Oh, there we go.
There you go.
Okay, so what we want to do
Just slide that over.
is show the Scrooby Covenant of 1606, just to get a sense of who these Mayflower Pilgrims were and what their covenant, their agreement with the Creator was. And this is a very serious matter for them.
And by the way, Scrooby is a beautiful little town in Nottinghamshire in the middle of England, not far from where I was born.
So as ye Lord's free people joined themselves by a covenant of the Lord into a church estate, in ye fellowship of ye gospel, to walk in all his ways, made known or to be made known to them, according to their best endeavor, whatever it should cost them, the Lord assisting them. So here we have it, that they didn't feel that they knew everything. They were open to learning and growing as things were revealed to them. And they put themselves into the hands of Creator, of Providence, of the Lord. So,
And you can see from that they knew they were putting their lives and the lives of their families on the line.
these are moms, dads, and kids, remember. So here we have the birth of the American mind, the first great synthesis.
And by synthesis, what Connie's referring to is the coming together of these disparate cultures, these English people of a particular mindset, and the Native Americans they encountered and befriended and had 54 years of peace and friendship with. two radically, a certain example of the Native Americans and a certain example of the Europeans, I love it, who came together and became very significant synthesis in the actual ideas, the mindset of the founding of this country in the very earliest days.
So they signed the Mayflower Compact before they land on this land, because they had their leader had sent them a letter that had said, when you get there, form yourselves into a civil body politic. So they drafted and signed this Mayflower Compact, and two of my ancestors were there and contributed and signed that compact. So this is a ancestral mandate for me to bring forth this founding of this nation and this vision and the facts of this synthesis. So that was signed in November 11th, 1620, on board the Mayflower. In 1621, the Wampanoag Treaty was signed in March of 1621.
Right around the spring equinox.
With the great visionary leader, Massasoit. He was a heart-centered leader. He saw the mutual humanity of the Pilgrims there, who they were. He sensed that, and they came together and signed this treaty and lived in peace and friendship for 54 years, the whole life of Massasoit and after, until the beginning of King Philip's War, which was declared by the Native Americans on the settlers whom they had been living with for those
all of their lives,
mostly 54 years.
So you had to be born.
So it was basically a civil war, this King Philip's War, and it was very bloody, and the settlers almost lost. And if the Mohawk hadn't come in on the side of the settlers, they would have lost. But ultimately, the settlers prevailed. And we're not going into that, but it's a whole very interesting.
Yeah, it's complex, and it's not well understood even by historians in this country. I have attended NIH, what is that, NIH? I think that's what it was, that conference.
Yeah.
Conferences, and listened very carefully to what the historians were saying. And each of them has their little focus, but I had a hard time finding anybody who had a big picture overview of the entire situation that didn't have highly inaccurate parts once again. And I'm a generalist, so I don't go into the focus little part. I look at the big picture and try to understand it possibly from up here.
Yeah, so our point of view has to do with the high side. So we don't put a big emphasis on King Philip's War and on the shadow side of that. We go forward with these syntheses because we can come together in our hearts, and we have in the past, and we can again.
And so, King Philip's War, by the way, most people hear that and say, who was the English King Philip? King Philip was a Native American whose father, Massasoit, had said, please give my sons, he had two sons, English names. And so he was given the name Philip, and he was the leader of the Wampanoags in Massachusetts, or at least of a certain group of the Wampanoags. And he really regarded himself as the equal of the king in England, who was by that time King Charles. So the English firstly quote unquote, like King Philip. There's a little bit of an attitude there, right?
Yeah, and they were well armed. And when they started this war, so we just aren't going to go into that at this point.
So many details. It's fascinating. This novel of mine, you might want to check into it. It's called The Mayflower Revelations.
Yeah.
And it's just basically going back into the written history. And of course, that history was written by Europeans, mostly English, but Italians and French and other visitors at the time. People say, oh, the English were much better armed and trained than the Indians were. Wrong, completely wrong. The settlers were farmers. They were not soldiers or warriors. And the Native Americans were indeed warriors. And they had more money than anybody because they sold a lot of land to the English. The English didn't come and steal it. They sold it, and deeds exist to this day that prove that. And the Native Americans, believe it or not, took that money, and some of that money went to purchasing illegal armaments from the Dutch and the French. And by the time they declared war, they were pretty well prepared. They had the latest, most modern weaponry, and the English were completely unprepared for the bloodshed that ensued.
Yeah.
So enough of that.
Enough of that.
It was
So
tough
that's
stuff.
54 years later in 1675. What we're focusing on is the treaty with Massasoit
And what
and the
happened?
3-day harvest celebration in the fall of
There you go,
1621.
right.
So we're going to move on to the next slide.
And that entire 54-year period during which extraordinary things unfolded in a
Yeah.
very subtle way of how one culture will influence another culture. And they were in full-time, 7 days a week interaction with one another. They lived together, they worked together, they exchanged all kinds of things together. And current archaeology is very much proving that.
Yeah,
It wasn't like an
the
apartheid
archaeological
situation.
digs are showing that now. And Plymouth Plantation is actually shifting and putting a Wetu right there by the English village. So
We too, you might think of as a wigwam, and there
Yeah.
are all these terms
Native
and so on that
we
we've
too.
become so familiar with. So we've got to make sure
Yeah.
people know what we're talking about.
yeah. And so here's the Mayflower Compact that I would like to, it's not the actual compact, it's what their intention was when they sat down to write it. This day, before we come to harbor, observing that some were not well affected to unity and concord, but gave appearance of faction, it was thought good that there should be an association and agreement, so that we should combine together in one body and submit to such government and governors as we should by common consent agree to make and choose. We therefore set our hands to this that follows word for word.
And it becomes the first document of democracy that came across the Atlantic on the Mayflower.
But we have to say that the Iroquois Great Law came to the Iroquois 500 years before that, and they were practicing democracy. So it's the document of democracy that came over from the European mind and heart and spirit, and it came together with the Iroquois Great
I
Law.
don't think the Iroquois wrote it. Don't think it ever became a physical document.
May
but
not, but anyway, that's a moot.
Actually, what's really interesting is apparently back around 1300 or so, when the Magna Carta was being crafted, the Native Americans in present-day New England were crafting the Iroquois.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story. We'll touch on that.
Okay.
The great Peacemaker coming to the Iroquois,
But
the warring tribes of the Iroquois.
But these two things happening on opposite sides of the ocean that were very, very parallel.
Yeah,
in
because
terms of-
the energies.
In terms of human and social evolution.
Yeah, and it's all about energies of what's happening in our evolution of consciousness that's worldwide. And like right now, we're in the middle of this pandemic with this huge global shift that's very apparently global because of the internet and our ability to realize we are in fact one people. But here we go, the promise of the US of A, the true American dream, humanity's birthright, consent of the governed, and this came with the Mayflower, consent of the governed, self-determination, separation of church and state, equal and just laws serving the common good, liberty, justice, equality, and abundance for all. In God, Creator, Providence, we trust. So we'll carry on to, and we have spoken a bit about New England before the Mayflower. Do you want to just touch on these briefly?
Sure. So as I plunged into the venture of understanding the Mayflower Native American relationship, I realized that I would have to understand what was going on before the Mayflower arrived. And it was very interesting what I discovered. And this is, again, relatively unknown information. If anybody's really interested, contact me and I'll set you up with some links. So during the years 1607 to 1620, let's go to 1607. What the political situation was in the northeastern United States, present-day United States, was a network of confederacies. The Iroquois Confederacy, the Massachusetts
Little
Confederacy.
typo there.
Who
the
has
T.
ever heard of the Massachusetts, 1T, Confederacy? The dominant tribe was the Massachusetts people, and there was a Massachusetts alliance of tribes. The Wampanoag Confederacy, the Wabanaki further up in present-day Maine and the Maritime States, and more. So that was the situation at that time, and these were these oftentimes warring tribes who had this sort of ever-shifting agreement in place, these confederacies, okay? And it was basically maintained by war, by physical dominance. Between 1607 and 1619, something occurred called the Tarleton's War. And if you go to one of these historians, and I've done that, and said, tell me what you know about the Tarleton's War, and they tend to look at me blankly and say, what? It's one of the most important pieces of early American history, and it's almost completely unknown. But if you go Google the Tarleton's War, you'll find an awful lot of information about it. So this is interesting. An unknown war. What unknown war? It was competition for the French fur trade, between the Micmac, if you've heard of the East Coast from Nova Scotia, tribe called the Micmac, and the Penobscot in present-day Maine. The war spread to Massachusetts and the Massachusetts Confederacy. Micmac, Tarleton's, they happen to be the same people. Tarleton's, that's not a Native American word, is it? Micmac, oh yeah. Tarleton's is a Basque word, it turns out. The Basque fishermen had encountered these tribes, and that's the name they gave to them that came down to first through the French and then to the English, the Tarleton's. Okay, a little bit of history here. And then in 1616 to 1618, that war exploded. It was competition up north. When the French fur trade began, there was competition for the trade, just like there is today. We all want a monopoly over the cash flow. So the Mohawk were really interested, but they were pretty much contained inland. They didn't quite get to the coast, but the Micmac up north were the first people to receive muskets from the French. Therefore, they became quite powerful. They were competing with the Penobscot, who are present-day Native Americans in Maine. And this competition turned into skirmishes, and then a really tragic thing happened. The Micmac came across, and this is up in the St. Lawrence River area, came across and devastated the Penobscot. They killed their entire leadership and their families and devastated the Penobscot. The Penobscot had allies to the south. The allies to the south were the Massachusetts Confederacy, who then sent warriors north to help and proceeded to have some success and kill a bunch of Tarleton's or Micmacs and grab a bunch of women and children and get themselves back to Massachusetts. Bad move, because the next thing we know, armadas of war canoes are coming down from the north and invading the coastal New England with devastating consequences. Firstly, the effects of the war itself, the intertribal war itself. But the biggest thing that happened is these warriors happened to be carrying a bacterium called Pestis versinia, which happens to be bubonic plague. And that's a whole story unto itself. But as these warriors came down from the north, down the coast, they brought with them a devastating pandemic. You know that word? That's a word not many people knew until recently. So this is just this amazing stuff that emerged. And between 70 and 90% of the coastal Native Americans were killed either in hand-to-hand warfare or by the disease. Whoa, how's that for a story? And the disease never went more than about 50 miles inland. It never got further south than Cape Cod. It never even made it to present-day Rhode Island, but it changed American history because when the Mayflower landed, there was nobody there. You've heard of Plymouth, Massachusetts. It was originally called Patuxet, and the Patuxet were a tribe with about 2,000 warriors when, what was his name?
John Smith.
Captain John Smith showed up there on a mapping expedition in 1614 and described Patuxet and actually renamed it Plymouth. And the story is long and it goes on, and I personally am fascinated by it. But when the Mayflower arrived 6 years later, there was nobody there because the Patuxet had been exterminated 2 to 4 years before the Mayflower arrived. And one Patuxet warrior survived. He happened to be the famous Squanto, who played an extraordinary role in the actual connecting of the Mayflower people with the Native American people.
And Squanto had been, the reason he survived was because he had been in England. There had been a whole thing of capturing the Native people and taking them to England as slaves, and he survived. And not only that,
and was brought home by some of his English
and not
friends.
only did he not only survive, he was treated with extreme kindness in England, in London, and learned English and liked the English. And when he got his way home, and he found his people decimated when he arrived home. But if he hadn't been in England, he wouldn't have survived, and he wouldn't have been there to be the translator and teacher of planting corn, etc.
Talk about the hand of providence.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So if you look at things from the
Amazing.
providential point of view,
Right.
one sees a different picture. And so it's important to understand that when they took these people away from their people and took them across the land to sell as slaves was a very bad act and was not okay in any way, shape, or form, but it had providential results. So here we go with both cultures experiencing extreme loss. Of the 102 passengers on the Mayflower that landed in Patuxet, Plymouth on December 16, 1620, 51 survived the first winter. They died of the general sickness, debilitating scurvy, and the effects of the extremely cold temperatures and unfamiliar organisms in the water. Only 4 adult women, 14 adult men, and 34 children, ages 1 to 18, attended that 3-day harvest celebration in the fall of 1621 with 90 plus Native Americans. It's really an interesting what is called the first Thanksgiving, that intercultural celebration that happened in the fall of 1621. And the Wampanoags suffered unprecedented loss due to the plague of 1616 to 1618. And Squanto, who became their friend, was one of the few remaining Patuxet, because there were, it seems like a couple of
He went
others.
looking for his people, and it was when he first came home after 6 years over in Europe, and he apparently found 2 old men, 2 elders, and maybe a couple of children. It was that
just
complete,
horrific.
the devastation of the Patuxet people themselves.
So if
And
we
so
just
madness.
realize this decimation of both cultures, the grieving of both
I
cultures.
think this is really important from a compassion standpoint. If we think about the Mayflower people, they lost half their people the first winter, including Connie's ancestors, who are 12 times great grandmother, 13 times great grandmother,
and grandfather,
great grandfather, and brother, and on and on and on, right? So think about, they never mention in the writings what they were feeling. There's no mention of grief, which is amazing. There was what's the word, stoic. But think about the Native Americans. They landed in a place that had past tense, 2,000 warriors estimated.
The Mayflower landed in that place.
When the Mayflower landed in this deserted, haunted place, the Native Americans they ended up meeting had lost huge numbers of their people. They didn't meet any Patuxet, except for Squanto. They met Massasoit and his Pokanoket group of Wampanoag Indians, and he was down. He was very powerful before the plague, and he was down to an estimated 90 men, 90 warriors. They only counted the men.
And so what we can realize from this pandemic and the grief and loss that we're suffering now, we can maybe touch base
A little bit of
with
compassion for both
what was
sides.
going on then in 1620,
But
1621.
I think that contributed to, I think it's a very good foundational reason to get together when two devastated groups of people find each other and meet and befriend one another. That can be very comforting. Plus, it was a more powerful union of these two groups because who are the guys in the Narragansett people still had 3,000 warriors. They weren't touched by the plague. So Massasoits, I imagine, had a certain amount of political necessity in aligning with the English the way he did.
Yeah. So here we're really going into this because this is a big part of our
novel, guys.
But here we are in the harvest celebration of 1621. What we have to realize is that by the fall of 1621, they had a good harvest. The Pilgrims had a good harvest.
The very first year.
Squanto had taught them how to plant Indian corn, which they were not familiar with, and their harvest was great. So here we have, this is the only paragraph that describes that 3-day celebration that became known as the first Thanksgiving and is now demonized in the telling of it. And here we have it. This is just that simple. Our harvest being gotten in, our governor sent 4 men on fowling, that so we might after a special manner rejoice together after we had gathered the fruit of our labors. They 4 in one day killed as much fowl as, with a little help beside, served the company almost a week, at which time, amongst other recreations, we exercised our arms, which they had to do to keep their muskets alive. So they had regular exercising of arms. Many of the Indians coming amongst us, and among the rest their greatest king, Massasoit, with some 90 men, for whom for 3 days we entertained and feasted, and they went out and killed 5 deer, which they brought to the plantation and bestowed on our governor and upon the captain and others. So there is that story, and that's it. That's what happened. 3 days of intercultural celebration. Would have been fun to be there. So here, let's keep moving. So here we go. Here's the Plymouth Paradigm from Betty Booth Donahue, Cherokee, author of Bradford's Indian book. We got to keep moving so we can get through this. Pilgrims and natives were as much alike as they were different. Both groups were highly religious and they understood the power of the spoken word. The Pilgrims did not arrive with the idea of taking land from the natives. They wanted to buy it and did. They lived in close proximity to each other. Indians lived inside the stockade and came and went at will.
And that's from Betty Booth Donahue, who is a Cherokee scholar out in Oklahoma. Right?
They visited with each other, exchanged ideas and information and goods, and understood each other. Pilgrims viewed the natives as sentient human beings and valued their opinions as much as they feared their savagery. There was mutual respect. Had other colonies followed Plymouth, things would have been very different for natives and whites. Much suffering and loss of life and culture would have been avoided. So here we want to just play something that expresses this this union, this friendship.
We have found the Indians very faithful in their covenant of peace with us, very loving and ready to pleasure us. We often go to them, and they come to us. Some of us have been 50 miles by land in the country with them. Not only the greatest king amongst them, called Massasoit, but also all the princes and peoples round about us, have either made suit unto us, or been glad of any occasion to make peace with us. so that 7 of them at once have sent their messengers to us to that end, so that there is now great peace amongst the Indians themselves, which was not formerly, neither would have been but for us. And we for our parts walk as peaceably and safely in the wood as in the highways in England. We entertain them familiarly in our houses, and they as friendly bestowing their venison on us.
So that's from Mort's Relation. It was published in 1622, and it just gives a feeling for this friendship from the pen of the Pilgrims.
So that
And here-
was the first great
First great
synthesis.
synthesis.
The
The
coming
second
together of those two groups. Now here we jump ahead in time, what?
150 years.
170 years?
Second great synthesis, the Iroquois Great Law influences the US of A. Ben Franklin was sent to the Iroquois to form a treaty with them, and he discovered that they had a constitution, a way of being together as autonomous entities, the 5 tribes of the Iroquois, and they were looking for how to bring the 13 colonies together. So he discovered that they had this constitution, and he invited them to the Iroquois to the Continental Congress Convention
In
in Philadelphia
233
years ago and
Today.
plus, because they signed the Constitution.
Hmm.
But anyway, it was a complex, and so I'm just giving the brief highlights, but it's a fact. And here the Peacemaker comes to the Iroquois, the Constitution of the Iroquois nations, the great binding law. And it was a Jesus type figure who came to the warring tribes of the Iroquois. They'd been in war with each other for generations. And he brought a higher way of seeing. And that's what we feel is happening now. We're coming to a higher way of seeing so we can move up and out of old ways of being. So it's a wonderful, wonderful story of the Peacemaker. And here are some of the attributes. Peace is the law is for peace. And here we are moving on to the Peace Weekend and the United Nations Day of Peace. So here's very important information for coming into peace on earth. The Peacemaker unveiled a new form of government, participatory democracy, and a legal system called the Great Law of Peace. The core teaching of the Great Law is that peace was the law and the law was for peace. Under the Great Law, 50 chiefs and clan mothers were organized in a 3-part system of government with executive, legislative, and judicial divisions.
Sound familiar?
The Onondaga Nation became like an executive branch. The legislative branch was formed when the Mohawk and Seneca were organized like the US Senate, and the Oneida and Cayuga, later joined by the Tuscarora, formed a sort of House of Representatives. The judicial branch was turned over to the clan mothers. Thus, the women gained veto power over war and the power to nominate the chiefs.
Can we have that, please?
Yes, I think we're moving in that direction.
Amend the Constitution.
Yeah, well, it's our behavior. All we have to do is do it. And now we have a vice presidential women.
Yeah.
And we had presidential nominees and run candidates. So we're working in that, moving in that direction. So a natural democracy. This is from Oren Lyons, who's a current Onondaga.
Like me to read that?
Yeah.
All right. In our Iroquois perception, all life is equal, and that includes the birds, animals, things that grow, things that swim. All life is equal in our perception. And that's from an elder named Oren Lyons.
So we move into the Indigenous Worldview, because what this is called, our talk is called the Third Great Synthesis. So we want to help people understand the Indigenous Worldview that has played a role in these first two syntheses, and we feel is a key player in the evolution of the American mind and spirit and democracy and the consciousness of humanity. So here's the Indigenous Worldview. Respect and reverence for all of life.
Interrelatedness of all things and actions.
Co-creative power of thought.
Concern for future aspects of present action.
Living in balance.
And concern for common good.
Trust in a higher power.
Incorporation of metaphysical into physical reality.
Equality of all aspects of life.
Sharing.
Cooperation. So that's a lot to take in just a list, but we just wanted to give a sense of what the Native people are bringing to us.
But you can see how that's a whole other paradigm from the one we are currently living, my friends.
And this worldview is something they actually lived. It's actually a way of life. It's not a religion, it's a way of life of the Native people. And so what we feel is that this worldview and other worldviews, we've all been affected by a lower frequency, a lower vibration of fear and scarcity and separation,
yeah.
Even though one has a high understanding of the nature of the universe, we feel the energy on the planet led to these wars we're talking about amongst the Native people and the horrible things that the white people were doing to each other and the yellow people and the black people. Everybody was doing really nasty stuff to each other.
Yeah.
And everybody at their essence has this understanding, because guess what? It's our true nature and the true nature of the universe. So we've just, in my opinion, our opinion, we've been influenced by a lower vibratory level, and our behaviors and systems have reflected that. So the good thing is we're moving into a higher frequency where we can come and align with this understanding and walk it. So here we have a Native American, Wallace Black Elk, who was a great friend of mine. Let's see if we're going to be able to run this. Doesn't, oh yeah, what it does is it starts, I want to run it from, yeah, I want to run it from YouTube.
And that lady you saw was not Wallace Black Elk. That was Sally Ranney, who some of you know, I know.
And she's introducing Wallace Black Elk. So let me do this because the sound runs better from YouTube than it does from embedded in the. So here we have Wallace, who was a great friend of mine and through whom I saw this nature of the universe that he's expressing here.
Grandfather Wallace.
Grandfather Wallace Black Elk. Yes, grandfather, tell us the way it is.
Today, we are honored to have with us Wallace Black Elk.
Mitakuyasi, to all my relations, and I thank you to each and everyone here and in the television world. And it's about time we all come to focus our mind universally, because I speak from the universe of minds. And the way we're born with love, kindness, generosity, and giving. So we're born with love. So the love in itself is God, and love is mother. So mother is love, and God is love, and so on. So I think this is the way we should teach our children.
There we go.
Nice.
So then
Now,
how do we get out of there? I do this, and then I do this,
Okay.
and
Good
then
job.
I
Go to the
do
next slide. Yeah.
next slide.
Aha.
So here we go into the third. Great. So,
Okay, Wallace, you're.
Okay, Wallace, you can take a break, guys.
Whoa.
Okay, that's Wallace. You can go online and hear Wallace and
Beautiful.
enjoy his drum and prayers
Mm-hmm.
on
And
The
that's
trust
actually part of the
frequency.
third great synthesis, because Wallace was here recently,
Yeah.
not
So
hundreds of
he,
years ago.
right, he catalyzed this in my heart and spirit and
Mhm.
worldwide. He traveled worldwide to share native understanding. So here we have the third great synthesis, humanity 2.0.
You ready for an evolutionary leap, anybody? Want to get
evolutionary
up
leap?
and out of this current situation?
Yes, let's do it.
This is Evolve Up, is it
Let's
not?
evolve up, shall we?
What an idea, what a
Evolutionary leap
concept.
in consciousness. So here we have humanity 2.0.
Is that possible to get it out so I can read it? Yeah. So what will we be when we become humanity 2.0 or Homo Universalis, as Barbara Marx Hubbard used to call it, right? The fully evolved human manifests the best features of all previous cultures. We are part of nature, not above it, aware of the scientific perspective, yet not ruled by it, tuned into a higher reality, yet fully present in the world. A synthesis occurs, which brings forth something that has never been on the planet before.
Yes, and the scientific perspective is now shifting
It's-
into
yes.
showing us all of this that we
Unified physics.
unified
Whoa, that's
physics.
another reality.
With Jude Currivan, with her whole worldview, and Nassim Haramein with
Mhm.
unified physics, and Marshall Lefferts with
Yeah.
cosmometry.
Cosmometry.
Yes,
I love it.
here we go. So here's an expanded paradigm.
Okay, so what does that mean? Well, and what's quantum physics got to do with this? Well, quantum reality illuminates and informs the Western paradigm. It expands our understanding of the nature of the universe, which allows us to align with the indigenous worldview.
Yeah, and the worldview of the Vedic, all the
All right,
seers
yeah,
and
this is,
all
by the way,
so
yeah, all of this brand new stuff is not actually that new, because about 5,000 and 6,000 years ago in the Hindu Vedic times with the rishis in India, all of this was in fact even written back in those days, which is pretty extraordinary. So, and now we're figuring it out through quantum science from Einstein on to the very present. And here we have one of the phenomena, quantum entanglement. What quantum entanglement means is simply this: we are all profoundly, completely, permanently, inextricably connected with one another. And quantum science proves that. That's pretty extraordinary. And if anybody has studied ancient Vedic reality, you'll find this word oneness and this word non-duality, because in fact, we are one.
yes, and it's just there in 2018, apparently they had a breakthrough discovery that shows that we are in fact one unified whole. And Jude Currivan is calling it the science of consciousness. So what we're bringing through and what the science is bringing through is that our consciousness, our individual consciousness, is the consciousness of the universe, not just planet Earth, but the universe. And this is what the native people in Wallace Blackout, the shamanic elders, have known and lived. And I saw through them this potential of the human race, but we can't do it and get there until we're cleansed of fear. Because if we have fear and we have all this power, we will use it to harm others, to gain power and control over others. So until we actually come to understand and that veil thins and we just get it, that we are one, we still have work to do to get to that place where we can have those powers.
And I would suggest that the oneness of creation is something that all of us experience, or at least those who have meditated successfully, even for a moment, because you will never forget it, or taken a psychedelic, or done a session in transformative breath work, or so many other ways to experience the oneness of creation, because it is the foundational reality of this entire universe.
Yeah, so we come to understand our personal power, and with the observer effect, the personal power we have to create reality. And you want to go into that a bit?
Yeah. So the second thing that we learned from quantum science is this phenomenon called the observer effect. And in a nutshell, what that means is that really, in a sense, nothing exists in the material world, in the manifest world, until it is observed. Until a phenomenon is observed, it's in the unmanifest or pre-manifest state. What did David Bohm call it?
The unfold and yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't blank
You're
on that.
going blank on that, you
So
know.
the point is that everything is potential. Everything is in a state of potential. It's at a wave particle factor. Everything's a wave and it's invisible until we observe it. And that can even be observing it with a scientific instrument. It's amazing. The moment it's looked at, it's there. When it's not looked at, it's not there. It's in potential.
So it's pretty wild. And once we understand this, we have to come to understand and act upon and take on the responsibility we have with where we put our attention and what actions we take and what we align with. We actually have in our book the 7 aspects of consciousness that actually create our reality, our vibratory level, and thereby our reality. And we have the responsibility to all of creation to put our attention on what's possible, what we can imagine, what's emergent, allowing what's emergent to come forth, because it's such a powerful force that we have with our consciousness. And we actually say it's a loving universe that responds to our requests, which are our aspects of consciousness. So we go into all that. You can get our book, The Trust Frequency, and check it out because it's a pretty cool construct on the nature of the universe. So here we go. Oh, and so what we are also bringing forth is this idea
of the conscious universe.
Of the conscious universe.
So yeah, the universe was, I have a scientific background. So I did a lot of chemistry and physics and mathematics back in my college days. And the universe was absolutely not regarded as conscious. And yet, if you Google the phrase, the conscious universe, you will find, I believe it's either 4 or 5 books with that title, same title. 2 of them by quantum scientists who I've actually met and asked questions of. So that was interesting. And the question I asked was this: if the universe is conscious, does that mean it's alive? And both of them said, hell yeah, of course it is. In other words, the universe is a living entity. What does that mean? It means it's actually a biological reality. So this is science. Biology is a form of science, but biology has not yet recognized that the universe is a conscious biological entity. But that's the fact.
It hasn't? Biology hasn't, but physics has.
And physics doesn't deal with life. So
yeah, well, yeah. But it's conscious universe.
So the point is that science is in the middle of a quantum leap as we speak. And physics has sort of led the charge by about 100 years here. And biology will catch up. These are forward-looking visionary scientists, myself included, who see that the universe is in fact a living, pulsating, evolving, electromagnetic being. Okay?
Yeah, and we call it the loving universe because we understand that it's all love. And that's coming, Jude Curvan is now calling it the science of love.
The physics of love.
The physics of love. And so it's because she's calling it that because love connects us and it's a connected universe. It's not a disconnected universe from the old science. It's a connected universe. So it's the science of love because love brings us together. And also from our perspective with our book, it's all love. There's nothing but love. And that's a whole nother story. So
love is actually that subatomic power that creates and sustains all things. It's way more than holding hands.
Yeah, it's a big deal, this loving universe concept. So we will deal with that in another talk, but you can get our book.
And you
here,
can get our brand new
our
book,
brand new
our
ebook.
ebook, which is almost ready for the light of day.
Right, and it is called The Conscious Loving Universe, a guidebook. So stand by for that, and we will help you understand that everything is vibration.
And this is something you probably know already. And I think any intelligent scientist would agree that everything is vibration, from the electronic subatomic level to the galaxies and all the way through to the entire universe. We are vibrating electromagnetic beings.
So we can choose our frequency because everything is vibration. And once we understand how we create our own vibration, our own frequency, what frequency we choose to live in, we can do that. But we have to understand what brings that to pass. So the laws are different in the different frequencies. What we have to understand is that this game that we're playing here on planet Earth at this time was a game designed in a lower frequency, responding to lower frequency of fear, separation, and the illusion of scarcity. And we can move our individual frequency up and out of that if we understand what causes our vibration and what causes what frequency we're in.
And this, the second bullet point there, we are conscious electromagnetic loving beings in a conscious electromagnetic loving abundant universe. Put that on your refrigerator, would you please, and don't forget it.
Yeah, but for the scientific minded, it doesn't really go with a heart-centered
The
understanding.
only science terms in there are electromagnetic. I think they can handle it.
Yeah, so and what we want to share is that the laws are expanded in the higher frequencies, the different frequencies. And this is a quote from Henry David Thoreau, who was a mystic and who was involved with the Native Americans. He was one of the top, or he was the top expert on Native Americans. He studied them in all resources to find out who they were in their essence, because he was a mystic and he could see what they could see. And he went to Maine several times to spend time with the Native Americans. We speak at the Thoreau Society often to bring forth this mystical Thoreau who became so knowledgeable about the Native Americans and spent time with them because he saw that they had something to bring to humanity.
And this is a quote from the closing chapter of Walden. You probably all know of Walden. And I would just like to say that Henry David Thoreau just celebrated his 200th birthday last year or so. I think it was last year or the year before. So again, what we're saying is not new. This has been seen by visionaries forever. And now it's being seen by scientists and present day living visionaries in this moment. And this quote for me, it just summarizes the work that we do in the sense of the book, The Trust Frequency. Here's a summary of it by Henry David Thoreau.
Well, it's a summary, but also it's a kingpin concept that the different frequencies have different laws and we can change our frequency. So this is part of this evolutionary upward spiral of the consciousness of humanity through this native, bringing this indigenous piece into it, and all the spiritual knowing and the new science. So here we go with this quote from the conclusion to Walden.
He refers to an experiment, and his experiment was
his 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days at Walden Pond.
In his little cabin.
In his little cabin. So he says, I learned this, at least by my experiment, that if one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live the life which he has imagined, he will meet with a success unexpected in common hours. He will put some things behind, will pass an invisible boundary. New, universal, and more liberal laws will begin to establish themselves around and within him, or the old laws will be expanded and interpreted in his favor in a more liberal sense, and he will live with the license of a higher order of beings. Now, put that one on your fridge because
As well.
oh yeah,
Hope you
you
got a big-
trust that.
hope you have a big fridge.
But to understand that and to get that and to know that if we walk in trust and act in trust, that we will pass this invisible boundary and experience a success unexpected in common hours and live with the license of a higher order of beings. That's what's up for humanity right now, is to go to that place and trust that place and move up into that higher frequency. That's what this pandemic has brought us and to this whole breakdown of our systems, everything, all this chaos is to bring us forth so that we access our hearts, we go forward into a higher place together. So let's see what's next. Do we have something next? Yeah, what's up? Oh, I have to be in that.
There you
So
go.
here's
Ah,
Wallace
there's Wallace.
again,
Uh-huh.
speaking about this. So we just want to show that he has got some insight for us on this subject. And this was in the 90s. So I'm going to go to YouTube
got a
again
YouTube
because I
again.
want to, what the heck, I can't move
Just
this
grab
thing.
it all the way over this side.
There we go.
Mhm.
Move that thing around.
Okay.
So here we go, Wallace on trust. Come to us, Wallace.
Pull it
Oh, I
up.
have to pull it up.
Think
Yeah.
so.
Oh, shit. Excuse me.
Yeah,
Huh?
bad girl.
Bad girl. Okay, here we go. Wallace on trust. Oh,
So,
dear.
grandfather, it is the doubt that has created the reality that we live in now, and it has we're unable to understand other realities that and the knowings that you have about the real nature of the universe. It's this doubt that has been the problem from the beginning.
Yes, it was told that pollution begins in the mind. For having a doubt against a creature, so first, second, or third, that doubt will visit you. So we're in the third generation, and so we could see that doubt is here. So that doubt goes around in the universe of mind. Then what it does, it casts shadow of fear. So everything turned wild.
Because we have choice, is it too late to change the course?
No, we got one more to go yet. Remember, 4 times. And the fourth time, I'm going to come back and I'm going to check up on you guys. So we got a little ways to go yet. So we already passed 3 and we got one more to go. So we still have a little time left. So that's why we're here. We're going to take every split second to tell each other that we should all come back together. We still have that chance. So we have to come back and try to understand the fire, the rock, the water, and green. Then once we all understand, it has to be unanimous. Now we're going to escape from our own self-destruction. So the whole world will turn green again, and we could live here forever. We have to stop abusing. Then for doing so, they say we put that part back. They say the well, as soon as he touched the earth, there'll be a flash of light and canopy the whole universe, and all the sickness that are incurable would be destroyed, not people. And even our dead will resurrect from death. So it'll be total victory. So it is possible that we could regain what we lost. This is the way we were told. Every step you take is a prayer. You have to live with it, walk with it. Not just say, a bunch of young Americans walk across the street and back to beer joints and play golf and win a roast marshmallow. It's not that. You have to live, walk with it. Your life.
Yeah.
You have to walk because Tagashla is watching you. And with this power, that will is in you. That Chanimpa is you.
So here's my prayer for America. Thank you, Wallace. That is beautiful.
It's not going to start.
My
playing in the
prayer
background.
for America and Americans
Here, how about if we
is
play
that
my
each
prayer?
of us
Okay.
is able to fulfill the vision my ancestors brought with them on the Mayflower 400 years ago. That we are free to live according to our conscience through a direct connection to our highest selves. I pray that we open our hearts and minds to honoring the Native Americans for their role in the birth and evolution of the American mind, spirit, and democracy. I pray that their wisdom continues to inspire us as we bring the true American dream into reality. Liberty, justice, equality, and abundance for all. In God we trust. E pluribus unum. From the many, one.
So there you have that. Now let's see how we gotta just
Make
stop
sure you
this.
get out of that.
Yeah, how do we stop it? Because it's gonna be wowza next.
Stuff it down there.
There's wowza. Okay, here we go. Now, what do? I gotta get this down. Okay, here we go. Yeah, technology.
Whoa, deep
So
breath,
come together.
everybody.
Yeah.
Challenging getting all these technical things to work together in sync.
So in the conscious, loving universe we trust. Here we have it on our money. It's right there. We are one. Here's the $1 bill.
And that word God actually interpreted means conscious, loving universe.
The conscious, loving universe we trust. In the trust frequency, when we walk in that trust, we gain that frequency, and trust replaces fear.
Ease replaces struggle.
Generosity replaces hoarding.
Abundance replaces scarcity.
Unity replaces separation.
New systems develop.
New relationships replace outmoded ways of being.
An understanding of the interconnectedness and sacredness of all things emerges.
It is in this way that true peace and profound freedom will come to prevail on earth. So this is a evolutionary leap that we're speaking about, is a higher way of seeing.
Trust,
Oneness,
open heart,
choose to walk in trust.
realize the true American dream.
Yes.
And you'll become humanity 2.0.
2.0.
The next phase of our evolution.
And once we recognize the role of the American Indian in the evolution of the United States of America, the dream for humanity carried to these shores by the early settlers of New England and Virginia will be realized, that we lead the world as exemplars of liberty, justice, and equality. Until that time, the United States, like a three-legged stool missing one of its legs, is out of balance without the Native American at the table. That comes from me in our Seeds of Freedom film, which is available online. Seeds of Freedom, A Vision for America.
Available free, right? Doesn't cost.
Oh yeah, it's
Oh, yeah.
available free on the Trust Frequency YouTube channel. And so where do we get to? We're coming to a close. Oh, it looks like this is a, oh, I didn't know this here. We've got a little something for us.
It
Let's
is
see.
time to move forward. It is time to take
Ah.
the inspiration of the intercultural syntheses of the first 50 years of peace and friendship modeled by Plymouth Colony and the melding of the great law of the Iroquois into the Constitution to the next level. It is time to respect, honor, and understand the American Indian point of view and way of life. It is time to welcome the visionary Indian to the table through an open-hearted and open-minded invitation to sit in council together and explore how we are going to realize the principles and ideals so treasured by the founders of this nation, the American Indian, and by all people who dream of bringing universal liberty, equality, and justice from the realm of possibility into actualization. It is time for a third great synthesis.
I believe that if the Indians and the white man would sit down and talk, it would be a much better world.
It has to come from the heart, from the spirit, from the mind of people of conscience. There's only one creator. That's all. That makes us all one. When that reconciliation catches fire, it will jump the oceans. We do have to take care of Mother Earth and clean up our ways and respect one another and love one another. That's all it takes. See the day, because it starts with you and it starts with me, and it has begun this moment, and nothing will stop it, because this sacred spirit fire wants to heal the entire human race, and it shall be done.
Yes, that's part of our
It is
film.
time.
Oops. That's part of our film, Seeds of Freedom, the closing parts of our film, The Seeds of Freedom, A Vision for America. And we just want to say, indeed, we are one. And we hope we've given you some sense of this third great synthesis of what's possible as we move into what we call the trust frequency, where this whole new ball game, this ball game we've been playing is not the only game in town. There's a party going on, we're all invited, and we're just not there. So we'll see you there. And here's an Aborigine who is giving us a little bit of knowledge about this.
We are all visitors to this time, this place. We are just passing through. Our purpose here is to observe, to learn, to grow, to love, and then to return home.
And tonight we will have some Aborigines in the EvolveUP room. So we suggest you stick around if you're
That's
here.
at 8:30, I think.
Yeah. And now we have the Bushmen of the Kalahari giving us a little.
And I grew up in South Africa, so these are my friends. And I took Connie there back in 2004 when we first met.
Yeah, so Andrew's known these folks for a long time, and I visited with him. And I say I've never been so loved on in my life, except by these beautiful Kalahari Bushmen.
They're not very good at social distancing. They tend to be very,
Very
touchy, lovely,
touchy-feely,
amazing people. And here's a quote from a book on the Bushmen. Open your heart to others. When you do so, you will feel our spirit. It will make you dance, and it will make you happy, and then you too will be a Bushman.
So it's all about the open heart. We're operating with an armored heart because the systems we've had in place haven't honored the heart and spirit of us as children, as adults, as humans. So we've armored our hearts, and now it's time to open our hearts to others. And we will dance and be happy, and we will be like those amazing humans, the Kalahari Bushmen. And that's the end of our talk.
But it says the beginning.
But it's the beginning,
Ooh,
because
it's the
it's
start of-
the evolutionary leap in consciousness. We hope we've catalyzed that in our viewers and come to help you come to understand the nature of higher frequencies, where generosity replaces hoarding, and unity replaces separation, and trust replaces fear, and all that good stuff. So we'll stop sharing our screen right now, and we will come and see if there's anybody in the Zoom room and that might have any questions or thoughts or comments. And
we've got a couple of books we could show you if you like. Let's see, how does that look? Here's one.
there's the Mayflower Revelations,
Remember I
and
was
it's
mentioning-
available on,
Look, it's a pretty big fat book,
it's a pretty big fat book,
and
but
it's
it's a fun story, a historical novel.
it's actually a contemporary dysfunctional family story about a family of Mayflower descendants who have different understandings of the nature of what went on 400 years ago. It's actually set on the island of Barbados in the year 2020.
So their families split. So some think that the Pilgrims were horrible people that did horrible things to the Indians, and some people think that they were good folks. And so the family is split. And that's very common today amongst the Mayflower descendants who don't understand what really went on there because of the pendulum has swung from, here was the pendulum honoring the Pilgrims for all they did and all they brought, which they totally deserve, but it left out the Indian, except for Squanto and the planting of corn and the 3-day first Thanksgiving. So it left out their heart and their spirit, so which is so crucial, and we hope we've brought some of that through in this talk. So that pendulum swung from here all the way over to here. And now we're demonizing the Pilgrims, and it's really horrific if you look at the real Thanksgiving online.
If you literally just
Oh my goodness.
Google that phrase, the real Thanksgiving, and you will find a whole lot of poisonous misinformation, if I may put it so kindly.
So it's just, so that's what he deals with in this, and in this novel and this family. And it's a really fun, historically accurate novel. And it's been reviewed and read by the top Pilgrim scholar, who said, yeah, go for it, Andrew. It's in the front of the book, and others. So Andrew had some fun with it, and also
For about 5 years.
for about 5 years. So we're looking forward to that. That may become a feature film.
It's a screenplay that has been submitted to a major figure in Hollywood. We shall see. Put out the prayers. Thank you, friends.
And this is our book, The Trust Frequency, that we've referred to. And it's an indigenous cosmology, quantum science synthesis. You see the Cocopelli on the front. Well, the Cocopelli equals MC squared. It's a synthesis of the scientific paradigm and the indigenous paradigm. And now that science is really proving this Cocopelli, that Cocopelli is a real live entity.
May I stop you there? It's possible that there are those among you to whom Cocopelli is not familiar. So everybody, or most of you, I think, will recognize something that looks like E equals MC squared. But I was looking for a symbol that would symbolize and represent the wisdom of the indigenous and native people of this planet. And Cocopelli jumped out. Cocopelli is a figure from the American Southwest. And some of you may know who that is or not. The real point of this equation is the equivalence of something equals something. Indigenous wisdom equals science. The balance between what we think of as science and all of the wisdom accumulated and kept by the people peoples of the earth who are in touch with nature, in touch with reality, that us Western left-brain people may have become somewhat disconnected from.
In touch with nature, but also the cosmos, the universal, the interdimensional aspects of reality.
Cosmos is nature.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so, and this Kokopelli guy, he is the humpbacked flute player, and in here he carries seeds. So he is the symbol of fertility. And that's where we're headed, is into an abundant universe as we move into a higher frequency and into abundance thinking, and where there's more abundance than we can fathom. And so there'll be no power and control over others, because we're in an abundant world. So a whole new ball game. Anything else?
Well,
I guess we don't
let's
have
see.
any
We've got a
questions.
few minutes. I think we have maybe as many as 5 or 6 minutes. And is there anybody who would like to engage with what we've been talking about? Any questions? Anyone like to know how to contact us? Those kinds of
Yeah.
questions?
Well, we can
No,
go
I
into
know, but
that.
just is there anybody there who'd like to speak up?
Well, most people are on Facebook Live. So,
Bunch of people are on their phone.
yes.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
the way to reach us is thetrustfrequency.net, and it's called first50years.us is our first 50 years project website. And we
The
also,
first 50 years, and it's spelled how?
no, it's just www.first50years.us.
First
And our
50
film
years
is
.us.
available on there, The Seeds of Freedom, A Vision for America. And we also have a website, theamericanevolution.com. It's actually my personal website from 20 years ago.
It's not the American Revolution.
No, the
it's
AmericanEvolution.com, and you can
Yeah.
access my 5-part film series there, which is a very important film series awaiting its time in the sun.
And what about that movie we made back
Yeah,
in the day
and
when
we
we
have
went to the Kalahari and hung out with the Bushmen of the Kalahari?
Yeah, we have the In Search of the Future movie.com. And
Right.
that film is a very important film if you choose to watch it. It's bringing Indigenous elders, scientists, and futurists together. And it's showing that what the Indigenous peoples know, these visionary elders are saying stuff they would not normally say to the public, but they knew and trust us because we've known them for 20 to 40 years. So it's a very important film, what it's bringing in. It's a complementary film to our book, The Trust Frequency. So let's see, and Andrew has a website. Andrew's an inventor, and he's addressed climate restoration with carbon capture, and you can kind of say a little something about what you're doing
that's
there, because we've got a
unexpected.
few
Thank you.
minutes.
Yeah, so we are nothing if not multifaceted. We engage deeply in consciousness. We engage deeply in climate as another realm of engagement. And so I grew up in South Africa, and I became a college teacher, and I taught, among other things, chemistry and chemical engineering. And when you think about too much carbon dioxide in Earth's atmosphere, well, could chemistry come into play? And the answer is indeed it can. So if we could design systems that would extract CO2 from the atmosphere at large scale, we could end up resetting Earth's atmosphere, which is currently overburdened with carbon dioxide, among other pollutants.
Especially now with the fires. My
One of
goodness,
the
it's
really-
casting carbon into the air.
Just to understand how much CO2 is going into Earth's atmosphere right now, and the recent fires in Australia, and before that in Siberia, and before that in California, again, just 2 years ago in California, extraordinary.
So you've invented some ways to capture carbon, and tell them just a little something about it.
I wish I had a slideshow to put
Yeah,
up, because
but-
we designed these beautiful buildings that are multi-purpose buildings, and it's called the Enviroplex. And it contains something called the carbon capture module, which is the part of the building which actually extracts and removes the CO2 from Earth's atmosphere. And here's an interesting secret. There's an estimated 1 trillion tons of CO2 right now in Earth's atmosphere that we humans have put up there since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution about 200 years ago. That 1 trillion tons of carbon is a precious resource. We can build from it. We can make fuels from it. We can do extraordinary things with it, and we can use it to enhance our growing capabilities in greenhouses. There are so many things we can do with that CO2 once we extract it from the atmosphere. So I think you can see where that's going. It's actually a business opportunity, because if think like a miner. Miners go and dig in the earth and pull out the coal, or they do all these different activities. We can mine in Earth's atmosphere, in the air, and we don't have to dig holes, go to the moon, or do any of these very expensive things. We can simply extract it right where we are and put it to use, put it to work. We can convert it into marketable products. And because we can do that, I truly believe this will happen. This phenomenon that we really must do. There are 3 legs to the stool of climate restoration. One of them is we must stop burning fossil fuels and putting these pollutants into the atmosphere. Number 1. Number 2, we must, and that's not enough. Number 2, we must begin rapidly extracting CO2 that's already in the atmosphere. That's the second leg. That's the one we engage with. And thirdly, here's a wild one. We must restore the ice in the Arctic and the Antarctic. And at the same time, we must stop stripping and burning our tropical forests at the equator. So it's a very big global project that we must engage in, or we will regret it.
And from the consciousness perspective, this whole crisis is taking us to higher consciousness.
Wake up time.
Wake up time and higher consciousness, so that we can get up and out of this whole thing into a new way of being that shifts everything. And that's my reality. And
I get it.
And boots on the ground, working towards it, coming together to work towards fixing and restoring the climate leads us into our love of Mother Earth, our love of each other, and our care, and our heart opens, and we move into a higher frequency. And guess what? It's a different ball game, and it's done in my world.
Yeah.
That's my world.
And each of these enviroplexes that I mentioned is a community center. It's a place where people can come together and collaborate and cooperate with one another in a very critically important sense of learning to live gently on this planet, and to actually return some of the love that Mother Gaia has given us since we were born.
In a healthy atmosphere, because health is such an important part of us moving into that higher frequency, and for opening our heart. It's very hard when we're ill and we're down and eating improper foods and stuff like that keeps us down, our frequency down. So we just need all of this to get up into that frequency.
Our vision actually avoids billions of dollars annually in unnecessary human medical costs. Think about that one. Not kidding. Not kidding. Just doing things differently that don't have the current consequences.
Exactly. This reality is over, and we're moving into vibrant health, open heart, peace on earth, heaven on earth. It's so exciting. And meanwhile, it's really tough stuff what's going on in the world. And through grief, we transform as well. And being forced into trust because our systems are collapsing, and the whole shooting match is going away. So we got to ride this boat up into human choice to shift and open our hearts and come together. We have to bring it through the physical, through our free will choice. And once we understand how loved we are by a conscious, loving universe, and what our requests are to that conscious, loving universe, which is our consciousness. And we have 7 A's of consciousness, 7 aspects of consciousness that begin with the letter A. And I will close with this little toolkit on understanding what creates our vibratory level and thereby our frequency, so that we can go forward and live with the license of a higher order of beings like Henry David Thoreau
And
has
I'll
given
do
us the
final
roadmap.
closing. I will summarize that in 4 words.
Okay, but
You're on.
first of all, here we go. With expanded awareness and accurate assumptions, we choose our attitude, consciously direct our attention, remember the observer effect, consciously direct our attention, align with our highest inner promptings. We let our heart speak to us and align with our heart. Our highest inner promptings, take committed action, which is the kicker. We have to walk it, just like Wallace said. We have to walk it. Take committed action and allow the loving universe to manifest beyond our wildest dreams. Because guess what? We can't fathom what's in that frequency. We can't even imagine, because it's higher, and it's just a whole new ball game. It comes through our imagination and our intuition. The cosmos is speaking to us that way. So listen up to your imagination, to your intuition, and act upon it, because it is guiding us all to this higher place.
And the
And
final
meanwhile-
word, trust the loving universe. It's actually all anyone has to do. Trust the loving universe.
Trust
Thank you.
the abundant loving universe.
Okay.
The
That's-
conscious,
that's-
loving, abundant universe.
That's a given.
That's a given. So
Much love,
we
people.
sign
Thank
off,
you. Thank
and
you for
thank
hanging
you
with us,
so
and
much.
many blessings.
Many
May you
blessings.
be well.
Yes.
I think you can just leave, yeah.